Welcome to the AdaptX podcast, where we have conversations with individuals who are building inclusive and accessible products, advocating for inclusion, or excelling in adaptive sports. Our intention is never to speak on behalf of those with disabilities, but rather give them a platform to amplify their voice so you can create more inclusive businesses and environments as well. Today, we're joined by Jake Hytken, an inclusive strategy and marketing design specialist with a career that has had him involved with huge companies like Snapchat, Airbnb, and Lyft. He leads projects with a combination of expertise and lived experience to guide social impact content strategies. He is passionate about product equity and seeing companies create more inclusion in the design process. Did I do an okay job there?
I think I sound pretty cool. Thanks for the intro.
Awesome. Jake, thanks for joining us today. Came across you on LinkedIn, really like some of the stuff you were posting. You shared a couple cool projects that you had worked on. It was really interesting to me. You helped Snapchat introduce Bitmojis that involves people in wheelchairs, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I
Yeah.
was sort of project managing that team with some great individuals, partnering around the organization with both the Bitmoji arm of the company and also me acting as the PM from the DEI team at Snapchat. And it was really great because we were able to build a product that makes more people feel seen, which is, how they want to express themselves, which is as they are, and have some pride in that and with some fun. And a little fun fact, the first iteration, so the wheelchair that's currently being used on Bitmojis is designed after my wheelchair.
That's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah,
people give me grief because I don't have a Bitmoji, but I feel like
yeah.
I'm like kind of old for that. But then a lot of people really like it. So, but why do you think representation in things like that are so important?
Yeah, that's a great question. When we look at, statistics, people with disabilities makes up a population of 1 billion people in the world. Now, what is a disability? Well, there's a lot of variance to that. And that is anything from a visible disability, I use a wheelchair, I'm blind, to an invisible disability, I'm neurodiverse in some capacity. Or what one of my colleagues in the disability space refer to it as neurospicy, which I really like. But with that, there's a lot of different people that are just not being served, with products. And when you think about how you represent people in media and programs and products, when you're not showing it, when you're not amplifying it, it perpetuates the cycle that we're not developing for a huge population in the world. And so what ends up happening is, because we're not thinking about those people by talking about them, it impacts in a ripple effect all industries in every way. So that's what we see in the movies, down to there's a reason that people with disabilities are the most underhired minority, not just in the United States but around the world. And it's because people have chosen that the politically correct thing to do, if you come across somebody with a disability, is to not look, to not stare, to not engage, because it's impolite. And I'm here to say to the world, we are here, we exist. You need to see us, and you need to listen to us, and you need to include us in every aspect of your surroundings.
Yeah, I think it's like a lot of people think it might be taboo to talk about kind of the profitability of inclusion and accessibility, but to me, because I think a lot of business owners think that they have to sacrifice some degree of success to be more inclusive, but ultimately inclusion is beneficial from a business standpoint as well. Have you kind of seen how those large companies have benefited from these kind of grassroots efforts to create more inclusive and accessible products?
Yeah, absolutely. This is the thing, because, what we do as a society is, we our brains only have enough capacity to get, the TLDR is what we say, the short, sort of bio, what we think something is. The problem is that there is a lot of nuance in all these situations. So what people hear often with disability is that they are a litigious community, because we only know about certain things like the ADA and the civil rights and the hard pushes to get access to just literal, medical benefits, to get access to not being discriminated against. And it's unfortunate, when we live in a world where, an entire population is pushed to the point of doing demonstrations, and in some cases having to go the complete legal route to be able to say, I want to be included. And, so that has really stained the brand of disability, where it isn't just impacting how businesses engage with it, but also people within disabilities in that realm who have disabilities struggle with the identity itself because it's become such a toxic word. And a lot of people with disabilities don't even refer to themselves as disabled because, they feel that it's such a negative connotation. And so what I like to do, which many of us are doing now, is reclaiming that word, putting pride into that word, because whether I like it or not, people are going to experience or see my disability. And so I can't hide behind it. And I know if they were not in front of me, they would refer to me as the big D word, which is disability or disabled. And so I'm owning that as my positive thing. It's made me who I am. I've navigated through the world my entire life with a disability. And so as to how that impacts companies, it's actually also very undiscussed, the impact it has. The most notable thing I can think of is we have Google's and Alexa's and Siri that we can attribute, all these smart home devices we can attribute to people with disabilities because, for instance, these voice assistants were originally developed for people with disabilities. So if you're blind or low vision and you can't see what's on your screen, you need your phone or the device to tell you what it is. So all that was actually a manifestation of needing to serve. And now you look at the future, it's kind of impossible to think what would the world be like today and what will it be like down the line if we didn't have literally voice assistants. And it is a huge profitable thing. It's created entirely new industries. And I think that's the thing. There's a really common sort of analogous situation that I like to say is that it's called the curb cut effect. And that's when we designed in the curbs starting in Berkeley, they're like, people with disabilities need to get up onto a curb. How do we do that? Well, we lower the dip on the corner. People in wheelchairs can roll up. And there you go. You have this curb cut. Well, what ended up happening when we designed for people with the most physical limitations, it ended up serving a much broader variety of individuals. It helped parents with strollers. It helped the elderly who were starting to lose mobility and needed a lower barrier to get up. It helped with people that were going around with suitcases or male men and women who were trying to do deliveries. And so my point to that is that when you design environments, spaces, and products, marketing, etc., for people that have the most need, you end up serving a larger, broader audience. And that's called the curb cut effect. But what it also translates to is the spending power, the financial, sort of farming that you can start to seed and help a lot of people grow in this disabled economy. The disabled economy is, I believe, one of the largest economies undiscussed in the world. And so in the UK, for instance, they call it the purple dollar. And they've been really progressive on pushing these things. And I recommend to any of your listeners to look up the purple dollar and find out some really incredible statistics about the spending power of people with disabilities.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a really cool stance, or at least a perspective of like when you think of how many products in our environment were designed for accessibility needs and how they just benefit everyone. That's just such a good point to kind of hammer home. Going off of that purple dollar effect, I think there's also that assumption that people with disabilities are always of lower socioeconomic status. So some businesses may believe that there's not really a population to sell to, but that's not the case.
That's a complex sort of conversation to have because
Yeah.
there's a few things there. Well, yeah, statistically, we are saying that this is the most underhired minority. So there is a lot of disabled people that were and are raised in environments where one, the cost of living is about 30% higher to support a disability. So that has implications on families raising people with disabilities and people experiencing it. That takes away from things like education, that doesn't even consider the areas and other demographics of your intersectional identity, which can impact your ability to get access to things that can level you up in life. So when you're thinking about that, Yeah, the truth is there are a lot of people, not by their own doing, that are restricted. So a lot of disabled people, because they're not able to get gainful employment, able to get the equal opportunity at education, we are lowering the chances of having qualified disabled individuals. With that said, how do you get a qualified individual in anything? Somebody has to believe in them. Somebody has to invest in them. And we shouldn't just rely on pedigree and opportunity based on the circumstances that somebody is born into to allow somebody to move forward and level up their own social status in society. You really need to do, as a socially responsible, let's say, employer, have programs for training, bring in talent that you're willing to invest in. And that looks at exploring how you would do that with different disabilities.
As a maybe a slight aside or a little bit of a tangent, it's just something that I've been trying to navigate or think through recently. But sometimes in the fitness space, I see programs for people with disabilities, and they're exclusively for disabilities, and maybe they're free. We see a lot of free programs. And maybe it's just a confirmation bias of me running a for profit fitness center that includes people with disabilities. But to me, the idea that everything for people with disabilities should be free has some issues. Do you have any thoughts on that? It seems to perpetuate this like charity model of disability where someone like me has to swoop in and save you, whereas I want to empower people with disabilities to participate equally.
Yeah, and so I think that's it's an interesting sort of positioning of questions here, because there's several things we need to consider. We do need to serve a community that doesn't have access to opportunity, that may have neurological spiciness to them, that have physical limitations, and what that means for what type of work they are or not able to perform. And in addition to that, we have essentially accepted that people with disabilities have so much opportunity through, let's say, socially minded conscious enterprise. But here's my news check for everybody listening today. There's a real problem when you rely on people doing good. That it's in a lot of ways, I very much disagree with the philanthropic model, because sure, there's good people doing good, but is the person writing the check spending the time with the individual? Is it changing their and challenging their own biases about them being charity versus they're a person? Also, one thing I experienced as a kid was I had access to all these different philanthropic things, but the moment I hit 18 and I transitioned into adulthood, suddenly, because I'm not this cute little kid anymore that can help fundraise for a nonprofit, I'm suddenly booted to the ground, to booted to the street, because I no longer can be a beneficiary of these nonprofits, because it's much harder to get nonprofits going for just adults living into their lives. And so there's really a ceiling that is really hard to break through. And when you are in a position where you're dependent on nonprofits, it becomes very debilitating to get access to the world. And so I think that we need to think of it from both sides. There's a need for philanthropic organizations, but there's also a need for profit organizations, because we need to hold for-profit organizations across the board accountable to say, it shouldn't matter who my product is for. I'm still building a company to include everybody, and that is equity. And I think it's this is how I say it's there's a great saying I learned from my old manager, which is there's inclusion and there's equity. Inclusion is we're throwing a dance for our school and we invite everybody. Great. Well, philanthropy is sort of like that. It's we're making sure that people have opportunities to get the invitation to the dance. But what's the point of going to the dance if you're not getting an equitable opportunity being asked to dance? So, the real differences of inclusion and equity is inclusion is being invited, but equity is asking the person to dance. And, it really, what happens is that you find everybody has this mindset of, oh, I'm going to invite them. but nobody feels it's their responsibility to ask them to dance. So still, even in what is perceived as inclusive environments, ends up being fictitious, because you have people in going, well, now that they're here, that's great, but it's not my problem. I've done enough. And that's the problem with philanthropy, is that a lot of the times, like, I've done enough. And that's why, organizations that are for profit go, well, they're bringing them to the dance. Like, we're just here to party.
Yeah, I like that analogy a lot. I just like, sometimes I think of my gym model and how I want other gyms to exist. And I just like, personally, I think where I'm at right now is that I would want financial assistance to be needs based, less than diagnostic based, because then it
Yeah.
kind of opens up like okay, well, how disabled do you have to be to get financial assistance? Is ADHD enough to get access to that scholarship or to that free program, or do you need a physical disability? Whereas I would just prefer it's a little universal, and that businesses are flexible in terms of supporting the clients that need greater assistance, but it's not necessarily contingent on a specific diagnosis. But I like how you described like inclusion versus equity. That's a really cool analogy that I think will resonate with a lot of people.
And when
Uh,
sorry,
no, go ahead.
when you're thinking of the gym, like, I think it's a perfect example that relates to this analogy, which is there's several factors that should be considered. For instance, maybe there's a needs-based scholarship, but that's based on like certain factors. Do they have a career? Do they not have a career? Maybe it's not a full scholarship, but it's saying that they're paying a monthly amount equitably compared to the people that what they can afford. But there's also other things. It's not just about money, which people are always concerned about when it's about inclusion with disabilities. A gym is a space, it's the dance, but it's not being asked to dance at a gym. It's, can you use the equipment? So are you buying equipment that has different adaptive modalities that can work for a range of mobility? It's about just spacing the equipment a certain spacing apart. So I'm invited to the gym, but can I navigate through the gym? That is equity too. That's the being asked to dance. Just by your placement of your machines is part of the equation of, I'm giving them the opportunity to dance.
Yeah, yeah.
And so,
It's not enough just to open the doors, but you also have to have the systems in place. And even from like talk about accessibility being multidimensional, like it's not just the physical environment. Like if you can get into the gym and there's a countertop that's at the right height for a wheelchair user by the ADA standards, but the person at the front desk isn't kind to you or like doesn't care about your experience, then that's not really equity, like you said. It's not an
yeah,
equal
I mean,
experience.
there's so many times I go to a place, they have a lower counter, but they make me talk to them at the higher counter. They seem unwilling or unaware that the social behavior to make me feel more included would be get eye to eye with me like you are with everybody else. All you have to do is take 4 steps to your right to get to this lower counter. I go to bars with my friends, and there's always that one accessible spot in the bar, at the bar, which is frustrating because it's like they build all these high tops and go, whoa, we're only going to get one person, if any, tonight at our bar. We'll give them this one spot. And what is that spot usually used for? It's used for waiters to essentially stack their supplies and their materials, because it's at an accessible height for them that feels out of the way. So, it's a mindset shift as well.
You talked about kind of growing up and what your experience was like, but you didn't dive into it too deeply. So what was your childhood and school experience like? You went to university as well, so you have a degree from
Yeah,
university
yeah,
as well.
yeah. Let's go back to trauma.
Yeah,
No, so okay, so I was born, and a few weeks after birth, we noticed that I had some weakness, that was abnormal, with an average, infant my age. And so there were sort of some flags being raised, and they started to recognize that it was continuing, and essentially was figured out, we're talking like the 80s right now, that that there is some sort of abnormality with my muscle tissue. What it was, we were not efficient at that time to be able to test. We didn't know a lot about muscular conditions. The tests were super expensive if we did know about anything. So it basically was just like, all right, let's monitor but continue his life as moving forward. I did start walking. I started walking with a wobble. I had lower muscle tone. But I was a kid that was active in the way that I was able to be. But it did transcend into my experiences differently. I always wonder, was it because, I was not athletic because of my disability, or I was a little gay kid that I was like hanging out with all the girls, not the guys who are playing sports at recess? Maybe, there are components of both. But I remember going to the playground and never being looked at by the boys, like never being talked to, saying, "Oh, you want to come play ball with us at recess?" Like they just ignored me entirely. And because of that, schools in public schooling, yeah, there's now a responsibility to build courses that are for people with special needs. But I think that, with the funding and with the training, at least in the era that I was growing up, that was limited thinking. For instance, like, oh, let's put Jake in this course with all these other ranges of disabilities and treat them all the same. And the problem is that with disabilities having such a wide variety of presentations, I was being talked to and treated the same way that another individual was when our challenges were very different. And so I felt often misplaced in these environments because, I'd be 10 years old with people that had a cognition ability of somebody that's 4 years old and being talked to the same way as them. And so I really feel that we need to be mindful about how we develop these programs. I'm fortunate to grow up in a good public schooling system, but it always was like I was very aware. I was like, oh, why am I in here? Like it doesn't make sense. Why are they addressing my needs the same way as that person's needs? And so as I got older, I went into junior high. That's when my disability was really starting to kick in with adolescence. In seventh grade, I grew 11 inches, and my muscles just could not keep up. And so at that point, a lot of atrophying and contractions. And then one day, 2 weeks before eighth grade, broke my leg, was too weak to use crutches. So I started using a wheelchair. And that's what started the onset of me being a wheelchair user, going in and out through my teens until I was pretty much full time in college. And during that time, now fast forward, we started in the 80s, now we're in the early 2000s. And medicine was starting to really gain a rapid flux in progress in how they were, devices and testing and all this stuff. So it was really interesting. I had a moment in high school where they misdiagnosed me and they're like, we think you could have a form of muscular dystrophy, which is potentially like deadly. We don't think you're going to live, very much further after 18. Being 16 years old, this was like, or 15 years old, this was like, what's the point? This is the end of the world, all these dreams. And I just kind of gave up. I got really depressed. And then finally I had another doctor go, okay, hold up. Here is a doctor making a bad call, just saying things, not realizing the impact they have. We say there's similarities of certain, certain attributes, but that doesn't mean that's what you have. You need a concrete diagnosis. And the reality is genetic testing is only 10 years away. My recommendation is go live your life, wait a decade, and we should be able to diagnose you. And so that's essentially what ended up happening. I had to get out of my depression. I went to school. My parents were very strict on the fact that the school that I chose had to be within a certain radius of a hospital. They were very protective, and all I wanted was to get out and go party, go do some keg stands and all that. So I went to school, I partied my butt off. I tried to block it out of my head. I had my intersexual experience where I ended up coming out in college. And then it was on actually later on, I was about to justify with insurance, which getting anything justified in our medical system is messed up and it's really hard. And so we basically have built a case for me to get this new testing for a full DNA sequencing. And I was just like, this is cool. And then my doctor was like, hey, there's one more idea. I think we should do this free test and see what it is and use that as sort of bait to can make sure that you get approved for genetic sequencing. I was like, great, let's do it. And ironically, after years and years of testing, building a case to get this huge test done, they found something. And on my 28th birthday, I got the phone call after doing testing at the NIH in Bethesda, DC area. They had confirmed my disability. And it was, I think, in terms of longevity and opportunity. Like, I have peaked, I've seen the worst of it. Now I just have to live as is and maintain. And here I am, in my mid 30s, just sort of navigating my life. And I was able to exhale and focus on me and my career and all these different things. And I suddenly was like, what's your passions? And I became a backpacker, traveled, and now I've been doing all these fun things and building my career. That was a lot. So Brendan, take over.
A lot to unpack there. Yeah, and I didn't mean to make you relive traumatic experiences. I was more so just interested in whether there were specific experiences growing up that kind of influenced the career path that you're on now, I guess. Like, was there a certain time where you thought, like, oh, I really want to get into, like, content creation strategies and promoting inclusion and accessibility through, like, the tech space? Was there anything specific that kind of influenced you in that direction?
Yeah, it's interesting because, we all have these, you know, pie in the sky dreams of what you want one day. When I grow up, I want to be X. And so mine was always an actor. And so, from an early age, I recognized my creative abilities. I was in theater. And then, I didn't come out of a top school. And so it kind of came down to you got to get a job when you come out of school, And so I started just taking the jobs that were in front of me. And that was sort of this catalyst that it turned into, because of my fortunate thing, which I'm very extroverted and I have no problem, being a personality in the room and, making conversation with people. I was able to take on little projects here and there. And so I found entryways into, before a time that diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, was in organizations, where I would find projects that I could help build, which started at Lyft. When I got in there, it was a small company that nobody knew at the time, and it blew up while I was there. And I was doing really cool projects for people with disabilities and all these great things. But I was not there originally for that. I was there for social media, but that was kind of like, finding ways that I could do the thing to get paid, but also do the things that I'm passionate about. And as I got more foundational support and belief in my abilities, I was able to take on more projects and more and more and more. And that's what sort of was the catalyst into becoming an expert in this arena. Do I think that I'm exactly where I want to be in my career? No, like I said, I wanted to be an actor. But what it has done is it's manifested things that I'm doing, where I can combine things that are passion for me. So I'm really proud of the fact that I've been featured in content and showing off independence and personality in videos for marketing. I've been really and doing it authentically from the perspective of how I want disabled people to be perceived and shown, not from how an able person feels we need to appear. So, do I still hope that one day I get that really cool role? That'd be awesome. But what it's done is having that pie in the sky dream has sort of been sort of my North Star that's brought me to really cool experiences, and always saying yes, not because this experience is the thing, but having the vision that doing more things that align with my personal values and agenda and interest can bring me closer to a dream that I want. And I think that a lot of people operate in this world where you're not hedge fund kids and you do those things and you just have to lay the bricks to go in a direction you want to go to.
What would you say was your favorite project that you've worked on?
Hmm. When I was at Airbnb, I met some great people that were making travel experiences for people with disabilities. You know, not only was I connecting with them, but I was also connecting with GoPro. And so all of a sudden, I always say 27 was my most millennial year yet, because I had just got like a boost of confidence. I had been working really hard. I had a lot of financial security. So I was less scared of the what if I don't get what I want. To be honest, financial independence is empowering because you can say yes, you can say no, and you can sort of project in the world that, I don't need you, but you want me. And so with that, I made some partners with an organization to build more accessible disabled trip experiences with this organization called Wheel the World. I also partner with GoPro, and they sponsor me to go backpacking, just me and my wheelchair and a camera. And that was really cool. And, I just was free in this moment. I was going out in the world and challenging myself in a way physically and emotionally that I've never done before, and was extremely vulnerable, but it was completely empowering, where I was like, here I am, not only on camera, but changing perception, and really feeling like, wow, I'm doing things that I've always set out to do. And that was just the funnest year of my life. And I hope I get more opportunities to be that guy again.
Absolutely. That project at Airbnb that was allowing house owners to add accessibility needs questions during that intake process.
Yeah, so the gig economy is interesting, right? Because it gives an opportunity for any person in the economy to say, I want to make an extra buck. Let me use what resources I have to make money. When it comes to housing, that means you know, when you have like a public company, they have to adhere to certain laws of the ADA. But when you have, a gig economy contractor sort of labeling, those laws do not apply. So for an individual with physical needs to be met, it's like, I know there are certain things I need and certain things that don't matter to me regarding my disability. So what I came in there and I did was I partnered with our trust and safety team, and I looked at the product and I said, let's evaluate what we can do to get more people with disabilities to use these stays, that would work for them, and without having to change the entire business model of Airbnb. So I worked with the teams, and basically we built filters where you could go around your house as a homeowner and say, okay, I know my home has step-free access. I know that my home have beds that are at a certain height that anybody can transfer to. I know that my home has a smart device that can help somebody with certain needs. And so what you were able to do was empower the homeowners to allow more people with different needs to say, here's what my house can offer you with your needs. And then the people with disabilities know that I don't need the gamut. I just need what will work with my needs, to go through the platform and get a lot more opportunities of stays that they want to go to. And so it empowered both the gig economy homeowners and the disabled people who want to use Airbnb.
Yeah, it's nowhere near the scale that you're referring to or that Airbnb would accomplish there, but when I was reading about it, it kind of reminded me of a project that I'm hoping to work on in terms of like endurance sports, so 5Ks, marathons, triathlons, and I think a lot of the times race directors don't have any experience in this space, so they don't even know what questions to ask, or they don't know what information to gather during the registration process. And when you don't gather the right information, then you can't be proactive in terms of how you cater the environment to the needs of the individuals. But at the same time, you also have to encourage race directors to be more transparent about their course. I run pushing a wheelchair, so if a course has a ton of potholes or a ton of turns, it makes it not super suitable for us. And I'm not gonna ask the race director to change the course, but it would just be helpful if I knew beforehand. So we're working on strategies to make road races more inclusive and accessible. And I think one of the ways to do so is just to encourage people to be more transparent with the characteristics of their race. To pick up your bib, do you have to go into a building, and does that building have accessible entrances, etc.? And when you're registering, one thing that's kind of an interesting puzzle to solve is we have different categories in races: top overall male, top overall female. There's different gender categories now. We have pushroom wheelchair, we have team Hoyt duo that like I run with. Some races are adding a neurodivergent category, but not everyone with neurodivergence wants to be recognized in that category. So it's asking the people ahead of time, if you were the fastest person with a diagnosed neurodivergence, do you want to win that category, or do you not want to be recognized in front of everyone as the fastest athlete with a neurodivergence there? So it's just asking the right questions, gathering the right information, but kind of spearheading that lead, like need people like you to help someone like me ask the correct questions.
Yeah, I actually love this point you're bringing up, because there's so much nuance to this. It's okay, well, we want to do a race. Well, we know it's paved roads, but then you're somebody who lives in this world and you're like, but hey, paved roads doesn't mean how are they maintained? Is it smooth? And I am working on a consulting project for a community in Portugal. And, part of this contract with this development is that it is, they work with partners that have experience to building according to the laws. And I was saying to my friend who works at one of these types of firms, she goes, well, I don't understand, like, what's your role in this? Because, we have people that, can see the laws and we can just plug and drop things into our schematics and our blueprints and just build it. And I'm like, so like, what's the point of you being involved? Like, and I love that question because when they asked me that, as my friend who sees the way I live, I actually, kind of was taken back because I was like, interesting that that's the argument versus like, oh yeah, like the more the merrier. And I never said this to her, but the argument is this, because I really needed to, and sometimes I'm caught off guard and need to think about it. And I was like, what is the argument? Like, why? Jake, he's disabled. Like, why does he need to be there? And the argument is this. Sure, we have laws, but we need to understand that those are very general best practices. What we lose in, creating environments, experiences, etc., is the day-to-day experience. The only way you're going to get the day-to-day experience is from people who live with disabilities and people who have some sort of daily interaction with people with disabilities, because there are things that are not in the laws that are never considered. So potholes would be an example. If you're in an environment, well, okay, well, we made a wide enough doorway, but does it need the push buttons? Those didn't really exist when the ADA came around. Or the internet. Well, the internet was before, the ADA, but so like, does the internet have to be? Or do we use what's called the WCAG guidelines, which are just guidelines? They're not law, because this came after the ADA. And when you think of environment, okay, well, we made the hallways wide enough, all these different things. Where do I come in? And I go, okay, well, that's great. You have a roll-in shower with grab bars, but where's the faucets? Can I reach it? I sometimes find it's too high to reach, or the shower chair is at the other end, or the soap dispenser is put really high up, or a mirror is just out of my way. And so just because laws are there on basic blueprint schematics, you need to talk to the person and different people with disabilities, or an expert of disabilities, to go, how do people live with a disability in the environments that we're building? Because they don't go hand in hand. They are separate conversations.
You had a quote that kind of reiterates that in something that I was reading beforehand. You said, like, society is obsessed with defining a person by what they lack, but people design what they perceive, not what they want to see in the world. So, like, if you don't necessarily, like you mentioned, if you don't see these challenges, if you aren't hands-on and, like, fully in the arena, then you can't even begin to understand why the ADA guidelines are just the base.
It's the base. And what happens is, frankly, I should know more of this, because I know, look, the first civil rights movements was Section 504, led by Judy Heumann, who recently passed away, who was a mentor to me, and was this phenomenal push of a like 20-something day sit-in in San Francisco's Capitol that ended up making waves, and all these people with disabilities got the first legal rights for people with disabilities, which inevitably led, and that was in the 70s, this led to the ADA. Now, the ADA devised and developed in the 90s, or affirmed in 1991, was great. I need to know who was involved, but it's also how you're looking at the world at that time then. And the world continues to change. We continue to learn more and expand what is neurodivergence. What is ADD versus Down syndrome? Do we put them in the same category of ability and mobility? It's a complexity of continuing to redefine and expand on definitions. And so I think that the ADA and all thought around it needs to be living documents. we're definitely due for updates that are on a much bigger scale. It was an amazing first wave and historic moment. But yeah, the landscape is changing, and it's great that we're having the podcasts that are literally featured about this, because the reality is people go, oh, the ADA is done, and a lot of people just stop talking about it for 30 something years.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been. I had a conversation with I guess Brad McCannell a couple episodes ago, and he just talked about how there's aspects of the ADA guidelines that aren't even relevant anymore. Stuff with having like talk to text type of telephones, or kind of different technology that like isn't even relevant anymore with the addition of the smartphone, but it's still in there, requiring quote unquote companies to have that as an option. So yeah, it's just the floor. It's definitely not the ceiling. So hopefully, like you said, it is a living document that's and responding to how things change. Since my allegiance and interest is kind of in like the fitness and health and fitness space, we've probably already covered some things that kind of answer this question. But what do you think the fitness industry as a whole could do to become more inclusive and accessible?
Love this question, because um, it drives me bonkers that really the only way for me to have true access to, daily working out, or not even daily because it's what insurance improves, is physical therapy. um I don't personally love physical therapy, because these are, trained people that are more injury focused, area focused, not thinking of in the mindset of going to the gym, of this is your entire body that we're thinking of holistically. And so when you're given a 20-minute session by your insurance, or 40 minutes, you could spend that entire time just doing stretches. You don't have time to make it a leg day or an upper body day. And so, you know, when I go to gyms are, I want to see these machines designed to be used by multiple varying disabilities. What I also want to see is that the environment is welcoming me to go into. That's not just the placement of the machines, but things that would be great for me. I want to make sure there's always a shower that I can use at a gym. Not an afterthought. Oh, we just threw in a chair. I want to be able to use the saunas there. And the responsibility falls upon me to go to a gym and say, hey, how would I do this? And they're like, oh, I don't know. You're the first person I asked. And when you're not giving training to the staff, when you're not building an environment that is, oh, great, we gave them a makeshift shower after we built it, that isn't going, well, if we have people with disabilities who pay our membership, the same as everyone else, how do we give them an equal, equitable experience there? And so, I'm talking to Equinox right now, which has one of the most astronomical um, rates to go there. And what drives me mad is like, I'm like, wait, so you want me to spend $300 a month and I can't use the majority of your products and the majority of your environment? Why should I be paying that amount? And so, and you don't have the training to say, well, we can adapt it, or we can figure it out for you. And so when I think about gyms, it's like you're asking somebody to spend the same amount of money for a tenth of the product. And so to me, I'm like, how is that fair?
Yeah, it's like I'm living in an echo chamber with some of the things you said there. So confirmation bias is a wonderful feeling. But like you mentioned PT, and how it's not always the environment you want to be in, and that's something that I talk about sometimes. I'm not a physical therapist, and I don't pretend to be, but for a lot of our clients, not only do they age out of PT once they turn 18, they no longer get through their school, but it's like some of our clients post injury or post stroke, they don't necessarily want to be in PT. They want to get back to an environment that they were in before. Want to kind of get back to a sense of normalcy. And PT, like you said, always just feels like rehab. It's like people want to just exist within the regular communities that they can be in. So
Well,
that's
and
why I think like that's why we're passionate about creating more inclusive fitness environments. So
yeah, and so what's really interesting about PT is like they focus on you're injured or you're sickly. And
yeah,
what happens is that I'm like, wait a second, so I have to be injured, which I'm not, or I have to be looked at as like I'm sickly. I'm like, I'm not sick, I'm me. And what I want my gym experience to be is like, I want to stay fit and healthy like everybody else. My definition of fit is different, but like I want a gym to be like my release of frustration, my motivation of my daily routine. And so I want it to be cool and fun. And the reality is that physical therapy does not create that environment, nor is that their purpose. So I think that's something to consider as well.
It's like the medical model versus the social model. And I mean, PT needs the medical model. That's what
Yeah.
insurance and everything relies on. But you had mentioned in a previous interview as well that like you kind of view disability as situationally dependent. And that's basically what the social model of disability is. It's not the fact that you're using a wheelchair. It's the fact that there's steps that are preventing you from getting where you need to go. That is the disability in of itself. So kind of creating environments that account for all individuals' abilities is something we hope to promote,
Yeah,
at
and
least in this space.
I also wanted to say that, I think what's really important is that kind of when we were talking about what disability products, do we not realize like it stimulates the economy and things like that? I think it's really important to be like, just because something was invented, like you should know that Siri was invented for disabilities. You should also know that the Pilates reformer table was invented for physical therapy. And now, as somebody wanting to use it, because it's actually one of the best devices for me to move with my body. I love the reformer. But guess what? The reformer has now been kicked out of physical therapy, so you can't even get that paid for or approved. And now it is a very costly specialized class you get to take every so often as a kind of gift to myself to switch it up from time to time. So here's this device that was designed purposefully for people with different mobility, and yet now it's been priced out where it can't even be used by those people, and it's just adopted by able people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an unfortunate reality, I suppose. Yeah, I think I really appreciate you coming on. I'm glad I reached out. I think this episode was packed with a lot of great things that hopefully people can take and apply to whatever industry they're in. The inclusion and accessibility starts at the beginning of the design process. I hope that's one thing that people take away. Like it can't
That
be
is
retroactively
exactly
done.
it.
Yeah, yeah. It's
it
not done retroactively. It's has to be at the forefront of thinking.
and I think that's the best thing takeaway from this entire podcast right here, right now, is so people are going, well, what now? What do I do? It is exactly that, which is it should be talked about and implemented at every stage of the process. So whatever your listeners are deciding to do with their business or the company, they should be asking these questions from the day one of ideation and saying, what steps do I need to take at each part of the process to build it correctly, inclusively, equitably? And so that means working with specialists, bringing in disabled voices to give their feedback, paying them, because often people like to get feedback for free with people with disabilities. And I think it's really important that at every iteration of whatever stage anyone is at, to make sure that it is a part of the process. So well said.
Absolutely. Jake, hopefully next time I see you, it's in a movie or a commercial so you can recognize that dream or aspiration of yours. But I appreciate you talking today. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, Brendan, thanks so much for having me and can't wait to listen to this.